Courtroom Bombshell. The truth no one saw coming. The courtroom in Port Charles was painfully quiet, the kind of silence that pressed down on every breath. Spectators leaned forward, reporters hovered over their phones, and the judge prepared to end a case that had already torn families apart. Everyone believed the truth had been decided. Everyone except Diane Miller. Diane sat at the defense table, calm on the surface, but her mind was racing. For days she had played the role of the resigned attorney, allowing the evidence to stack up in a way that made her client look cornered. Even her closest allies questioned why she hadn't pushed harder. What no one realized was that Diane had been waiting for the right moment, waiting for the final word, waiting for the lie to collapse under its own weight. As the judge adjusted his glasses and prepared to speak, Diane suddenly rose from her chair. "Your Honor," she said firmly, her voice slicing through the silence, "before this court reaches a verdict, I must request permission to submit one final piece of evidence." A murmur rippled through the room. The prosecutor froze, the defendant looked stunned, and in the back row, one person's face went pale. The judge hesitated. "Miss Miller, you had ample opportunity. With all due respect, this evidence only became clear when someone in this very courtroom made a critical mistake." That was when the tension exploded. Diane approached the center of the room, her heels echoing like a countdown. She didn't look at the defendant. Instead, her gaze locked onto a familiar face seated among the witnesses, a person who had testified earlier with confidence and charm. "Let's revisit your timeline," Diane said smoothly. "You stated that you were nowhere near the scene at the time everything unfolded. You even provided a witness to support your claim." The witness shifted uncomfortably. "What you didn't know is that your so-called airtight alibi relies on a detail that simply doesn't exist." Gasps filled the courtroom. Diane revealed that a time-stamped digital record, overlooked by investigators, directly contradicted the testimony. The record didn't just place someone near the event, it proved that the wrong person had been protected all along. The prosecutor objected, but it was too late. The judge allowed Diane to proceed. As Diane laid out the truth, a shocking motive emerged, one rooted not in greed or anger, but in desperation. The real culprit hadn't acted alone, nor out of impulse. They had carefully manipulated circumstances, quietly steering suspicion toward someone they knew would never fight back. What stunned everyone most was who had helped cover it up. A respected figure in Port Charles, someone known for their moral compass, had knowingly withheld information, not because they approved of what happened, but because revealing the truth would destroy multiple lives, including their own family. The courtroom erupted. Friends stared at friends, families reeled, long-buried grudges resurfaced in an instant. Diane turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the evidence speaks clearly. But sometimes truth doesn't need a confession, it only needs silence." All eyes shifted to the real criminal. They didn't speak, they didn't move, but they didn't deny it either. That hesitation, just a heartbeat too long, said everything. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. The case that once seemed closed had been blown wide open, and Port Charles would never look at justice the same way again. Outside the courthouse, chaos reigned. The exonerated individual struggled to process freedom they never expected. Their relief was mixed with betrayal, because the truth had been hidden by someone they trusted. Meanwhile, the exposed criminal faced not only legal consequences, but total social collapse. Allies vanished, support evaporated, secrets long buried were suddenly fair game. And Diane? She walked out quietly, her job done. But she knew this wasn't the end. The revelation would spark new conflicts, fractured loyalties, and dangerous alliances. The courtroom bombshell was only the first domino. because in Port Charles, the truth never arrives alone. It brings consequences that ripple through every life it touches. And this time, no one would escape
The courthouse
unscathed.
emptied, but the damage followed everyone home. What Diane exposed didn't just change a legal outcome, it reshaped power in Port Charles. The person cleared of all blame stepped into the daylight, surrounded by cameras, yet felt no relief. Freedom came with questions no one could answer. Who decided I was expendable? How long did they plan to let me fall? What else don't I know? Behind closed doors, anger replaced shock. Someone hadn't just lied, they had carefully engineered a downfall, counting on silence and fear to keep the truth buried. And now, that silence was gone. Late that night, Diane sat alone in her office reviewing a file she had intentionally kept sealed during the trial. The courtroom truth was only half the story. Hidden within the evidence was a second layer, one that implicated another player, someone powerful enough to derail the case entirely if exposed too soon. Diane whispered to herself, "Not yet." She knew timing mattered. Reveal too much too fast, and the real architects would disappear. While Port Charles buzzed with rumors, the exposed criminal made a calculated decision. No lawyers, no statements, no public defense. Instead, they visited someone unexpected, a person with influence, resources, and their own reason to keep the past buried. The conversation was brief, tense, and filled with unspoken threats. By the end of it, a deal was forming, not one written on paper, but one built on mutual destruction. If one fell, they all would. Meanwhile, the respected figure who helped conceal the truth found themselves isolated overnight. Calls went unanswered, invitations disappeared, even family members kept their distance. But what no one realized was that this person had one final secret, something that could completely rewrite the narrative if revealed. They hadn't acted out of loyalty, they had acted out of fear. And fear makes people unpredictable. Within 48 hours of the trial's conclusion, something went wrong. A crucial piece of evidence related to the case vanished from official records. Not lost, not misplaced, erased. Someone was cleaning up loose ends. Diane was alerted immediately, and for the first time, concern crossed her face. The truth she unleashed had triggered a counterattack, and now the fight had moved beyond the courtroom. This was no longer about justice, it was about survival. As Port Charles slept, one message landed on Diane's phone. "You exposed the wrong moment. Meet me before you expose the wrong person." No name, no number, just a warning. Diane looked at the screen, knowing one thing for certain. The real mastermind was still free. And the next revelation wouldn't happen in front of a judge. It would happen in the shadows, where rules don't apply and mistakes cost everything.